Welcome to the first episode of the Black Top 5 podcast. We coming live from the Omanala Griot Afrocentric Museum. And our first guest today is probably the biggest guest in the country. My brother, the good brother, Dr. Umar Ifatunde. Good morning, good brother.
Good morning, brother. Peace and Pan-Africanism. Glad to be with you.
Glad you're here, brother. So I wanted to start my episode off with a quote that's in Dr. Amos Wilson's book, and it's an excerpt from Marcus Garvey. And that quote is, Garvey, they called Garvey in the middle of a quote, they asked him what his mistake was. He said, my mistake, you ask, is trying to change the conditions of men before changing the minds of men. I think that's a great way to start this off because you recently completed your major renovations on FDMG, the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy.
Yes, sir.
And in Garvey fashion, you actually corrected a mistake that Garvey himself identified. So I want to first and foremost congratulate you on that, brother.
Thank you.
That's a great gift to the African world. And as somebody who has visited the school personally with my children, I can attest to the greatness that's to come from that. So I first want to congratulate you on that. Let me ask you this. Dr. John Henry Clark made a statement one time. He said that it will have to be a generation of African people educated on the continent of Africa. How do we make that happen? And is FDMG Africa in your plans?
Great question. Number one, when we were in the process of searching for a campus, we met with so much difficulty, so much sabotage that I had considered switching the focus for the first school from America to Africa. But then I had a spiritual divination as I practiced Ifa, the spiritual tradition of the Yoruba peoples of Nigeria. And the Babalabo who did my divination, he said that you will have a school in Africa, but your first school is to be somewhere near your birthplace. And of course, Wilmington, Delaware is only 40 minutes drive from Philadelphia. So I considered going to Africa with the first school, but I was told that I had to hold off on that. So yes, FDMG Africa is definitely within my plans, and not only FDMG Africa, but FDMG all over Africa and all over the diaspora for that matter. As you know, in Brazil, South America, we have one of the largest populations of Africans outside the continent. They could definitely benefit from an FDMG. The Caribbean islands, where I've been spending a lot of time lately, they could benefit from multiple FDMGs. So my vision, my goal, my contribution to the revolutionary Pan-Africanist struggle is to become the first superintendent of a truly global Pan-African-centered school district. That's my goal. You know, we're only given about a century on this planet, give or take a decade or two. So you have to really specify where you're going to make your mark, your contribution, because you can't do it all. And so for me, it's going to be building that global Pan-Africanist school district. So if you're in Atlanta, you have an FDMG in Atlanta. If you decide to relocate to Botswana, you got an FDMG Botswana. You decide you got to go to London for work, well, guess what? We got an FDMG in London, UK. So that's my vision. And we're starting with the first one. And as you said, renovations for the Marcus Garvey Elementary School are complete, which means at the start of next year, we'll be beginning renovations for the Honorable Frederick Douglass High School, which is a much, much, much larger physical structure.
Right. Well, like I said, that's a great gift. And as a parent and knowing other Black parents, I've often noticed our people don't have a true appreciation for education like we should, which leads me to my next question. Most parents also don't have a vision for their children when it comes to education with school. They just think, they tell them, you know, go to school, make good grades, get out, get you a good job. Some of them now saying, you know, go be an entrepreneur. But what type of entrepreneur? So I first wanted to know, as far as your upbringing, what took place in your household that nurtured the mindset that you have as it relates to wanting to liberate the hearts and minds of African people?
Great question. And one comment I want to make just before I answer that, going back to the previous discourse, you know, when you spoke of how Marcus Garvey said that if he had to label some aspect of his work a mistake, it would be trying to change conditions of people before you change the minds.
Right.
He also said, don't take the kinks out of your hair, take them out of your mind.
Right.
You know, and of course, the Honorable Frederick Douglass said it's better to raise strong children than to repair broken men.
Right.
I bring that up because in raising the funds for the FDMG Academy, which we've been doing over the past 9 years, I met with some criticism in the regard of why are you starting with a school? Why not start with a military? You know, why not start with something else? And that was my very argument as to why I didn't. Right. Before you can have any other revolution, you got to have a psychological revolution. Right. You know, my background, I'm a psychologist by training, so I understand how important the way people think is towards raising consciousness and also transforming environment. So until you have a free African mind, you're not going to have a free African school, a free African military, a free African hospital, a free African bank. You can build all them institutions today and they'll be closed within 5 years. Right. Because if you don't change Black people's thinking, the loyalty necessary to sustain those institutions is not there and they will fail. So the reason we're starting with FDMG, to your point, is we have to transform the minds of our people before we can transform the conditions. Right. Now, as it relates to me and becoming who I am today, I have much of that credit to give to the elementary school that I attended, George G. Meade, 18th and Oxford Street in North Central Philadelphia. I grew up poor, very humble, but my parents were not poor in spirit, especially my mother. And at the Meade Elementary School, coincidentally, while I was there, we had a Black history class. It was not district-wide. It was not required, sponsored, or made mandatory by the district. It was just something that the school I attended decided to embark on. And my 4th and 5th grade Black history teacher was a woman by the name of Mrs. Green, first name Lillian or Vivian, who I coincidentally ran into about 10 years ago. But anyhow, she was my introduction into Black consciousness, Pan-Africanism, and public speaking, because there was a Black History Month oratorical contest. So I entered that and I won first place both years, 4th and 5th grade, and I never shut up. And I remember coming back for my 6th grade year to find out the Black History program had been removed, and it crushed me. You know, because this is my final year. I'm graduating this year. I want some more Black history. It was over. So I only got it for them 2 years, but I'm a living testament to what can happen when you're taught who you are at an early age. Right. Now, whether Mrs. Green and the Black history class was the catalyst for being who I am, or whether it was simply the mechanism that unleashed the destiny that was already within me, I'll never know the answer to that. Right. But I would argue that it was already there and she just simply gave birth to it. Because the next year, 6th grade, I believe it was, 6th or 7th, I went to my first family reunion. And that's when I learned that I was related to Frederick Douglass. My 4 times great-grandfather, Stephen Henry Bailey, who was a Civil War veteran and a former businessman from Eastern Shore, Maryland, him and Frederick were first cousins. They grew up on the slave plantation together. And he's the cousin, Stephen, that Frederick talks about in his autobiography of the life. Right. So I'm a blood relative. And to that point, I had a chance to visit Frederick Douglass's gravesite yesterday in Rochester, where I had the keynote a youth graduation. And I think it's just very prophetic how we finished the renovations on August 11th. Right. And purely by coincidence, I end up at Frederick Douglass's gravesite and then the Marcus Garvey celebration in Harlem Thursday in Atlanta today. So my first 2 stops after finishing the renovations were to celebrate Garvey and Douglass.
It's divine. It's divine, brother. So you were talking about the education that you received at your elementary school. So I noticed that education and discipline go hand in hand, especially with young children, because I'm a father of fairly young children. So I wanted to know, as a psychologist, in your estimation, how important is discipline in developing the psyche of Black children, in particular Black boys?
It's critical because discipline is divine. God is discipline. The sun rises at a certain time on a schedule. Right. The moon rises at a certain time on a schedule. You know, you get your 4 seasons of the year on schedule. You know, you get your eclipses on schedule. The entire universe is ran on a divine schedule. And so we as African people, in order for us to manifest our divinity, we have to also manifest discipline. And I consider discipline to be one of the most important jobs of a Black parent, because if your child doesn't have discipline, it doesn't matter how much talent they have. It doesn't matter how much skill they have. It doesn't matter how intelligent they are. When I speak at, graduations like I did yesterday in Rochester, I always tell the young people, I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how talented you are. It means nothing unless you have the discipline to perfect that skill. Right. You understand? So And it's critical that you bring this topic up because that's a big problem in our community because we have so many of our Black boys being raised by single moms.
Right.
And that's not the mother's fault. It's due to the war on Black men.
Right.
And a mother is not a natural disciplinarian. She's a nurturer. So she's more likely to negotiate as opposed to set standard. That's the father's job. But because of the absence of the father from the home, that's giving birth to this situation where Black boys are not going to school or into the world with the discipline that they need. Not because of the failure of the mother, but because of the failure of Black men, those of us who are available, not putting some structure to the raising of Black boys who don't have their fathers at home, you see. So I don't fault the women, I fault the men. And so that's given rise to a situation where the schools are targeting Black boys for the ADHD, the conduct disorder, the ODD, the learning disabilities, the emotional disturbances. Even though it's illegal to put children in special ed for behavior, it's supposed to be learning. They're using it as a trash can where they dump Black boys who don't know how to control themselves. Right. Even though it's illegal, they're doing it. Right. And so we have to do better with the discipline in our community or we're going to lose another generation of Black males.
Very good information. And one thing about the discipline, you touched on it, is in the single parent household, especially when the mother is the primary guardian, a lot of times that discipline can be compromised.
Yes.
Which leads me to this question. There are a lot of parents, a lot of Black parents who aren't together. And for those who are not together and who don't get along, how do they keep the children's best interests, including discipline, at heart when the situation is like that?
I'm going to go back to discipline again because the children's priority should take precedence over whatever relationship conflicts the two parents have.
Right.
So with that being said, the children should never know why y'all broke up.
Right.
The children should not know y'all don't get along. They should see none of that. So you got to have emotional discipline. You have to keep your children's best interests at heart because one of the quickest ways to destroy self-esteem of a child, and if you look at children who have low self-esteem, one of the biggest causes of that low self-esteem after parental criticism is parental conflict between one another. See, when the father talks about the mother, you're still hurting the child. When the mother talks about the father, you're still hurting the child because that child is a composite of both of you.
Right.
23 chromosomes over here and 23 chromosomes over here.
Right.
So, there's no such thing as getting a child to take sides.
Right.
And you often see immature, emotionally underdeveloped parents who will try to get their children to take sides with them against the other parent. You cannot do that. That is the most unfair and irresponsible and selfish thing you can do to try to get your son or daughter to take your side against their other biological parent.
Right.
Do you realize that if it wasn't for that other parent, that child would not be here in the first place, and you're asking them to declare war against them, and it's wrong. And I've seen parents do this to children as young as 7, 8, and 9. They're babies. You're asking babies to get involved in an emotional adult war. Right. It's wrong and it's unacceptable.
Thanks. Well, yeah, that's very true. And, I have a lot of people in my life who go through that situation where they, the co-parenting situation isn't ideal because it's oftentimes not a base of the children's best interests. And so, like you said, the emotional immaturity gets in the way.
Absolutely. And the other thing I would add to that, we have to recognize that the demons of the family we grew up in were passed down from the demons of the family our parents grew up in.
Yeah.
So when we talk about ancestry, we tend to talk about ancestry culturally, historically, spiritually, but we have to talk about ancestry psychologically. And not all that was handed down to us was positive and progressive.
Right.
The bad habits of great-grandma may still be in the family system. The bad habits of great-grandpa may still be in the family system. If great-grandpa was an alcoholic, there's a strong chance great-grandson would be alcoholic because it's very difficult to break the intergenerational curses of a family cycle.
Right.
Very difficult. You've seen this. I've seen this where someone decides, my children are not going to be raised like I was raised, or my children are not going to be surrounded around the types of threats to their survival as other children were in my family. So you often have to uproot your kids and take them somewhere else because you recognize how powerful the influence of dysfunction of the family system can be upon your children. And so I don't think we as African people has paid enough attention to eradicating the intergenerational transfer of psychological dysfunction.
Right.
It's a big issue. Child abuse is an intergenerational demon. When you look at child abuse, you'll find that generation after generation suffered from that child abuse.
That's true. I never thought about it like that, but it's funny because my one of the last things my grandfather was telling me is that you can have traits from somebody you never met. You know, it might be your 4 times great grandfather, and they had this issue, and it exhibits itself in you. So correcting that, you pointing that out is, you know.
And I'm gonna go one more level with that too, my brother. I would often argue, and of course I'm an African traditionalist, so I'm biased to the way we do things,
Right.
you know, which is older and predates Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad.
Yeah.
And in our tradition, we believe in ancestral veneration. We believe in keeping the ancestors' essence with us on a daily basis. We believe in pouring libation, and we believe in honoring them and venerating them. This is another reason why, because even though your ancestors now on the other side, they're up in heaven in the land of the Arun, they still influence things now. And because they're able to see their mistakes from a higher plane of consciousness, they're in a much better place to intervene and help fix what they broke. So that same grandparent who's responsible for the alcoholism, responsible for the molestation, responsible for the emotional abuse, the physical abuse, the abandonment, the sibling rivalry, now you can call on that same spirit and say, you introduce this into us. Can you help us fix it at the same time?
Right.
And this is why, as African people, ancestral veneration is indisposable to the reconstruction of healthy Black families and extended family networks. You need them ancestors. The same ones who harmed you can now heal you from the other side.
Okay, so, and that is perfect how that segues in this next question. When you're talking about the African traditionalism and that information that you just gave, is that why the European value system dominates our household, because we have lost our sense of African traditionalism and being educated about the African fundamentals and culture that we naturally supposed to possess?
Absolutely. Cultural and ancestral genocide. A lot of our problem as African people is we have no cultural boundaries around us. Every culture has a boundary. They're insulated by their traditions and their customs, right? A European Jew will simply tell you, we don't do that.
Right.
A Mexican will simply tell you, we don't do that.
Right.
An Arab, an East Indian, an Anglo-Saxon, a Chinese will simply tell you, we don't do that.
Right.
With African people in America, we don't have a we don't do that standard because a lot of us don't know who we are. And unfortunately, when they stripped out the culture, they replaced it with religion. And religion was no better than the slave plantation, because just like the slave plantation, religion teaches you not to take control of your collective destiny, to leave it up to God. That's no different than the plantation that tells you not to take no interest in your collective destiny, leave it up to the slave owner. So all they did was switch out a white slave owner for a white Jesus. And so now you're still not taking control over your life. You're saying it's up to God. It's up to Jesus. Black people's situation will get better when God decides to make it better. So that same slave conditioning that we got on the plantation, we actually get it inside of the Black church today.
Right.
You see, and Black church preaches a very dangerous, colorblind consciousness that makes Black people feel bad for practicing racial loyalty. It makes Black people feel bad for putting African people first. We're the only people in the world. You can't find another race who feels bad and ungodly for showing favor to their own kind. Black people are the only people who will go out of their way to prove to you that I'm not just loyal to Black people. I don't just care about Black people. I care about everybody. You'll never hear that from another group. And that's why the message of the most honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, when he said, put the race first. We still haven't put the race first. We will die for religion. We will die for fraternity. We will die for sorority. We will die for Masonic Lodge. We will die for our gang. We will die for our neighborhood. We will die for our profession. We will not die for our race. We do not have a racial ego. We got a religious ego. Talk about my religion, I'll kill you. Talk about my gang, I'll kill you. Disrespect my church, I'll fight you. But disrespect African people, I'll forgive you before you even commit the offense.
Yeah, you're right about that. And like I noticed too, this is kind of off topic, but like here in Atlanta, you know, it's a big LGBT scene here. And I noticed during Pride Month, all the black restaurants have a gay pride flag, the LGBT flag or whatever. But you look at the Mexicans, they don't have that.
Nope.
Chinese restaurants, they don't do it. Going back to what you were just talking about, how we don't do that. You know what I'm saying? But we seek to like ingratiate ourselves with every other culture and put it above and beyond our own.
And because we have no cultural boundary, whenever America catches a cold, we catch the flu.
Right.
Whatever America says is normal, we will take it and exaggerate it. It don't matter what white people do. No matter how dysfunctional or non-progressive it is for the black community to indulge in it, we're going to indulge in it. And that's a big reason why we got to watch what our children consume on television and radio, because we are literally the sponges that soak up all the filth of American culture and bring it right into our own community.
Right. No, that's a fact. So switching gears, a few weeks ago, we saw Jamie Foxx kind of bend the knee to the Jewish community where he apologized for an alleged anti-Semitic quote. Then in this same month, earlier, the NAACP held a convention, and part of that convention was Meek Mill and Robert Kraft on a panel talking about stopping anti-racism and anti-Semitism. And that kind of confused me because I'm thinking, you know, the NAACP is supposed to be black. Why are they so concerned with anti-Semitism? I hadn't seen any anti-Semitic crimes committed by black people against the Semite people. So what I wanted to know, in your opinion, why does the European Jew have such an interest in the behavior of black people?
Historically, the European Jewish community exploited the black community from a civil rights standpoint. We were used by them to be the out front foot soldiers of the civil rights struggle.
Okay.
They funded it, financed it, but they hid in the back. And then after we achieved those landmark Supreme Court decisions and legislative policies, they then came out of the woodworks and benefited from it. So we have always been the front man for the European Jewish civil rights agenda. The NAACP was founded by European Jews, and it is predominantly funded today by European Jews. You understand?
Right.
And so, you know, that's one of the biggest reasons why it's difficult to have a conversation about racism against blacks without European Jews being included in that narrative. But also, even beyond the European Jews, we have to recognize that because America is so anti-black, this is an anti-black country.
Right.
There's no getting around it.
Right.
But because America is so fundamentally anti-black, in order to make sure black people never become the focus of true intervention, they have to include other people in the conversation so it can look like they're talking about us when they're really talking about helping another group. This is why they use words such as multicultural,
Right.
disadvantaged, non-whites, you know, minorities, you see, or the conversation that you referenced, which I did not see yet, but I heard some conversation about it. We're going to include the Jews with blacks. We're going to include the gays with blacks, the transgenders with blacks, the Ukrainians with blacks, the Afghanis with blacks, never just black alone.
Right.
And the reason for that is to make sure we never become the focus of intervention like we was during the civil rights movement.
Right.
Dr. King was, a political and a media genius. Dr. King was able to keep the black agenda on the front page of the news and the television for nearly a decade. No other leader has done that since Marcus Garvey and Frederick Douglass. Dr. King did that. And so after they were forced to give up that civil rights bill and forced to give up that Voting Rights Act and posthumously forced to give up that federal housing bill, they said, we got to take the black issue off the table, because if we don't get this off the media agenda, we're going to keep on having to concede to Negroes, and we don't want to do that. So that's why a few years after Dr. King was assassinated, the homosexual revolution took place, because they needed something to block out the black agenda. If you notice, every single presidential administration, there's a priority minority issue separate from what matters to black people. Every president had a priority minority issue. For Barack Obama, it was homosexuals. He used homosexuality to block out the black agenda. For Donald Trump, it was illegal immigrants. He used the illegal immigrant war to block out the black agenda. For Joe Biden, it is immigrants and transgenders. Those are the topics he focused his civil rights issues on to make sure ours never see the light of day. You see, so you will never see black people focused upon as a singular entity like we were during the days of Dr. King. You'll never see that again unless black people organize and agree that we're going to push a race-first agenda that does not include any other group. When we speak, we should only speak for the black.
Right. And kind of moving into this, you see that a lot. We oftentimes talk about culture, black culture, and we recently just celebrated 50 years of hip hop, and we've pretty much claimed that. But when you step back, and I hadn't really seen an analysis on this outside of you, but when it comes to hip hop, which is black culture, well, I guess we could say it's black culture, it's owned and controlled exclusively by the European Jew.
Absolutely.
We make the music, we make the beats, but they fund it.
All
like
the
how
profit,
you were talking
all
about.
the profit is them.
Right, like you were talking about with the NAACP, you know, when they fund it, they essentially control it. So can we say that these art forms or expressions of art like hip hop, is it still black culture when we don't own and control it? Like Lil Durk or NBA Youngboy might make a song about doing horrendous things. And I'm not knocking them, but I'm just saying it's the European Jew and their platform and their labels that put that out. They can't make a song about killing dogs. If today Lil Baby makes a song about killing German shepherds, they're gonna stop that. You can't do that. But you can talk about killing brothers all day long. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So is that really black culture when they own and control it?
The art form is unquestionably African, but the content is unquestionably European. You understand? And the agenda is unquestionably one of genocide towards African people. At a fundamental level, taking us back to Garveyism, one of the central tenets of revolutionary Pan-African nationalism and or Garveyism is self-determination.
Right.
Black people have not made up our minds that we want to be a self-determined people. We are still content with handouts. We are still content with subsidy. We are still content with European paternalism. That means white men dictating our actions. Right. We're still content with European maternalism, white women dictating our actions. And until we decide that we really want to be free, because there's no such thing as freedom with another people funding you.
Right.
So the NAACP cannot be a revolutionary organization.
Right.
The Urban League cannot be a revolutionary organization. Our fraternities and sororities can never be revolutionary organizations as long as you have a multicultural premise and a multicultural agenda. Our black churches cannot be revolutionary because in order to be revolutionary, you must be all black in purpose and mind, and you must be all black in funding and subsidy. It has to be both.
Right.
And very few black organizations in this country, even conscious organizations, if you look at them close, they're not black in mind, they're not black in consciousness, not from an African perspective, and many of them are funded by European entities, okay, or entities that are hostile to African progress. We as black people have a problem doing it all by ourselves. Right. And we wonder why the Chinese are winning. They doing it all by themselves. Right. You see, the Arabs, they're doing it all by themselves. We're the only people running back to the government, asking them to fund things we need for ourselves while we waste $2 trillion, even when we have the reparations conversation. And I support reparations because it was Pan-Africanism that gave birth to it, okay? But isn't it a contradiction to say we can't do nothing for ourselves until we get reparations for slavery, but we're a $2 trillion people? $30 billion on hair. Why do you need reparations to get started? You see that? $4 billion on liquor. Why do you need reparations to get started? $2 billion on Air Jordans. Why do you need reparations to get started? $800 million on chicken, turkey, beef, and pork. Why do you need reparations to get started? Yes, we're entitled to reparations, but being entitled to reparations isn't the same as reparations being necessary for you to begin the process of reconstructing your reality.
Right.
At the end of the day, Black America does not want responsibility or accountability for solving our own problems. And everybody knows it. And this is why nobody fears us. Because as long as Black freedom will require a Black dollar, nobody's worried about Black power.
No, that's true. And you kind of touched on it. It's an element of white exploitation that we always make ourselves susceptible to. Like with the hip hop thing, with the 50 years of hip hop. Like I said, you don't really hear too many people do a cultural analysis on it. Like right now in hip hop, we have a new sector with the podcast. And two of the biggest podcast spaces within hip hop are run by white men, DJ Vlad, Adam 22. And both of them have based their platform on Black conflict, and they exploit that. So I guess my question is, I'll give you an example. I meant to bring this up, but like on Vlad, I saw this a few years ago when the late Kevin Samuels was still alive. Vlad was actually on there trying to instigate him to say something about you. He said, I had Dr. Umar on, whatever. And Kevin Samuels was intelligent enough to downplay it and instead turned it and kind of big up you and kind of, talk about how you all had more in common than not. And you rarely see that. Most people go on these platforms and exaggerate the issues and amplify the issues between Black people. So how do we, and this is beyond hip hop, how can we put ourselves in position to stop making ourselves susceptible to white exploitation?
We have to make up our mind that what's best for Black people is what's best for us, and we haven't done that yet. Most Black people are selfish. We operate on a extreme pathological form of Eurocentrism. It's all about me, myself, and I. What matters to the group never weighs in on the decisions that we make about ourselves. Gangster rap could not exist in another culture because they would not accept it.
Right.
But because the gangster rappers are some of the more wealthy people in our community, and because Black people love money more than everything, including Jesus, okay, even though they won't admit it, they love money more than Jesus. Whoever has the money will automatically be sanctified as a leader or somebody we can worship or follow. Money rules everything in the Black community. We are not a people of morals and honor. If we were, there could be no such thing as gangster rap. If we were, there could be no such thing as pastors, making millions of dollars a year with a church in a community that doesn't have a single relevant, viable institution in it. You see, so we have to take a long, hard look in the mirror, because from a metaphysical standpoint, the world around you is a reflection of the world within you. And Black people have to stop trying to scapegoat the white power structure all the time. They are responsible for our problems, make no mistake about it, but they're not responsible for why we're still in them problems. We haven't made up our minds that we want to be free. The most honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey said it best when he said, if we really got to know ourselves, and if we really made up our minds that we wanted to be free, in 24 hours, Garvey said it takes a day. In 24 hours, we can have a new reality tomorrow. We're not interested in freedom because we fear the responsibility that comes with it.
So how do you change that then? Because going back to, I believe your kinsman, Frederick Douglass, said, well, you just said it, it's easy to build strong children to repair broken men. How do we implement that in our children to make them want to accept the responsibility of doing for the race, putting Africanness first? You know what I'm saying?
In order to fix any systemic problem, the solution has to be systemic. This is another issue we have as Black people, because you get a lot of hit and miss solutions, a lot of hit and miss programs. Somebody would say, well, I'm doing this, but you haven't systematized it. It's not a solution. It's only a Band-Aid. You understand? So even with FDMG, we have 2 schools in Wilmington. It's not a solution. It's a solution for that area, but it's not a solution for the race until I systematize the schools and start putting them all over the world. Until we franchise FDMG, the benefit is limited. But again, going back to our selfishness, going back to our individualism, going back to our loyalty to our clique rather than to the race, most of our what could have been solutions end up only being Band-Aids because we don't want to put the work in necessary to systematize it. I can't think of anything in the Black community that's systematized outside of church.
Yeah, that's a fact. The name of this podcast is Black Top 5. I wanted to get this from you. Who are 5 figures that black boys should know before they hit 4th grade?
Before they hit 4th grade, that's tough because there's so many.
Right.
I'm going to choose 5, but I could have easily chosen 50 sets of 5 because there's so many great men and women who've come through our past. One of them would be inventor Garrett Morgan. I think Garrett Morgan, his life story, what he went through, and also some of the landmark inventions that he gave birth to are so critical that it's worth black boys knowing who they are. And I would say that our inventors have been a very neglected aspect of our history and culture. And one of the things we're going to do at the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy is we're really going to hone in on the inventors and pay attention to their achievements.
Right.
So I'm going to say Garrett Morgan, but I'm going to speak collectively of all black inventors. Okay, I'm going to put the Queen Mother warriors from the American African struggle. So I'm talking Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, Fannie Lou Hamer, Anna Julia Cooper, the queen of the Pan-Africanists. Those 5 women, and of course we could go Anna Murray Douglas, Amy Jakes Garvey. There's others, Mary McLeod Bethune, but I'm particularly picking up the warriors, the ones who confronted the white power structure.
Right.
Tubman, Truth, Wells, Hamer in particular. They fought for the system. Excuse me, they fought against the system. Our boys and our girls need to know that they were black women who are willing to risk their lives as much as black men for our freedom. And in fact, when we talk about Queen Mother Harriet Tubman, she's the only woman in American history ever to lead soldiers into battle. And when we talk about Queen Mother Ida B. Wells, she was the closest woman in American African history who came to being the undisputed leader of black America. The only person who kept Ida B. Wells from being the undisputed leader of black America was Frederick Douglass. Had Frederick Douglass joined the ancestors 20 years sooner, and we're glad he didn't, Ida B. Wells would have went down in history as the first woman to be universally recognized as the leader of black people in America. That's how powerful she was, going from city to city, investigating lynchings and exposing, think about that, exposing the names and addresses of the people responsible for the crime before we had any rights whatsoever to protect our lives.
They got to kill.
Absolutely. So those women. Third, I'm going to put Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey together. And the reason for that, number one, in my opinion, they were the greatest American African leader in the time they lived. Okay. They were also 2 of the greatest influences on black people globally. Of course, when you talk about Frederick Douglass, you're talking about the first black man to prove intellectually that black people were not inferior when he published his narrative of the life. And when you talk about the Honorable Marcus Garvey, you're talking about a man who arguably can be the only black man in modern history to be considered leader of the race.
Yes, sir.
Because there was a chapter of the Garvey movement in every major black community on earth. So Garvey was a race leader, you see. I got to put Booker T. Washington in there as both an educator and a Pan-Africanist, and he's the link between Douglass and Garvey. You know, people often ask me, how do you connect Douglass to Garvey? Real simple, Booker T, because Douglass was Booker T's mentor and inspiration. So if it wasn't for Douglass, you don't get no Booker T, and if you don't get no Booker T, you don't get the inspiration from Marcus Garvey. Not only that, Robert Love was a Bahamian scholar and one of Marcus Garvey's first teachers. He ran into some political trouble in the Caribbean, and it was Frederick Douglass who got him out of it. If Douglass doesn't save Robert Love, he never becomes Garvey mentor. Garvey may never become the Garvey we know. So Frederick Douglass had an indirect hand in giving birth to Marcus Garvey.
See, that right there, I probably learned more about black history just then than I did during my entire probably K through 12 education. And that's one of the common things that we see when it comes to school and black children is that our black educators, not knocking them, but a lot of them feel like their hands are tied when it comes to teaching black children about black history and culture. And now we're in this time of where they banning critical race theory, and you got DeSantis down there banning black history. What can black teachers do to circumvent that, to still impart black history into our children's curriculum?
I'm going to give you the solution, and I'm going to give you the Band-Aid.
Okay.
The solution is black teachers need to come together and build their own schools.
Right.
You follow me? That's the solution. A solution is something that is done that eliminates the problem completely and forever. You see that? That's the solution. but black people are allergic to building their own institutions because we don't want the responsibility. You see that? So the Band-Aid is for black teachers to create their own independent black teachers union. We've never had a black teachers union in America, and it's time to build one now. You see, because now if you have a black teachers union, you can advocate for black children the way that they need, because the white teachers unions, which are largely the American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association, they don't advocate for black children. You understand? They only advocate for themselves. So we need black teachers to form their own union to look out for themselves principally, because they're the last hired and the first fired and the most overlooked and mistreated. You see, even right now in America, we have a black teaching shortage for the first time in a long time, a black teacher shortage, you see. So we need them to start their own union. That would be a good intervention until we are serious enough to implement the solution.
Right. All right. So I want to move into Garveyism right quick, because I'm a Garveyite and the world knows that you're a Garveyite. Going back to my education, I didn't learn about Marcus Garvey from kindergarten to 12th grade. I knew about Malcolm X because my mother was serious about making sure, because she was a single mother, she made sure that I knew of strong black men. But, you know, she didn't know of Marcus Garvey either. I didn't learn about Marcus Garvey till I was probably in college. And when I learned about him, I thought he was made up because I'd never heard of him before. And I'm thinking, somebody who did all of that, they surely would have taught us about that, but they didn't. Then as I learned, I'm like, wait a minute, this is wild. And so I wanted to know, when did you first learn about Marcus Garvey?
I believe my introduction to Garvey was in my Black History class at Meade Elementary, 4th and 5th grade. I would be reintroduced to Garvey when I joined the UNIA, which was around 1997. I believe it was my final year of undergrad. And ironically enough, the UNIA, which was considered international headquarters at that time in Philadelphia, was right next door my entire life to the shoe store where my mother bought all my sneakers. Think about that for a minute. So from the 4th grade until my 5th year of undergrad, so you're talking 8 years old until 22, I was going next to the Garvey building once a month, every 6 weeks, every 8 weeks for some shoes, right? I never knew. You know how I learned about it? They finally painted it red, black, and green and put a picture of Marcus Garvey in the window. Had they never painted that building, I would have never joined, because I would have never knew that that was the Garvey headquarters. And so one day, I'm at the sneaker store, and Elder Johnny Gossett comes around the corner. He was the caretaker of the building. He's an ancestor now. And he said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "What's going on inside this building?" He said, "This is the UNIA ACL." He said, "You need to come back Sunday at 3 o'clock. I came back Sunday at 3 o'clock. Here we are.
Right. So let me ask you this. As far as his philosophy and opinions and African fundamentalism, it's a two-part question. If you can isolate one, what do you feel like is the most important concept that you hold near and dear to you and to parents, teachers, coaches, anyone who has a love for black children? Which concept of Garveyism do you think we should introduce to black children first?
Self-confidence. For me, it's the belief in African triumph. It is the vision that we will ultimately succeed. Above all, Marcus Garvey was a revolutionary optimist, and you need revolutionary optimism, especially now, because you can see the discouragement in the faces of black people. You know, I think one of the reasons why I'm loved so much is I'm able to breathe some of that revolutionary optimism black into black people. You know, we need people who are going to cheerlead us. As the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey said, you have to sell the black man to himself. He said that the white man made being black a curse. I'm going to make it a blessing. We have to sell our people back to ourselves, because we are punch drunk from racism. But we are also punch drunk from insincere leaders who have come before us claiming to be leaders, never giving us a plan, running their mouth for decades, and never delivering nothing to the people. So we're punch drunk on both sides. I'm punch drunk from my enemy, and I'm punch drunk from my own opportunistic leaders who built me up and made me think we were going somewhere, only for me to follow them 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and at the end of the day, they delivered nothing for me.
it's I like the way that you put that, how we punch drunk, because it seems like we like that in a lot of facets of our lives. And I like to also think, and I want to get your thoughts on this, I also feel like we punch drunk when it comes to election time. In 15 months, this nation is going to vote for the president again. And, you know, they start now, you know, with getting you emotionally vested in the process and what you're going to do. You got the Trump indictments going on right now. You've got RFK, he's supposed to be running with the Democrats against Joe. Dr. Cornel West has even thrown his hat in running for president. What should Black America's mindset be going into the 2024 elections?
Well, Black America should be organizing right now to put our votes together in an independent Black union, as the Honorable Marcus Garvey had in New York, the Black political union. And we should, because we can't win the presidency, we don't have the numbers.
Right.
But what we can do is we can leverage our votes to get some of the items on our agenda checked off. So we should be organized independently, and then we should ask to meet with the leading candidates for the Republican Party or the Democrat, or just wait for their nominee.
Right.
You understand? And say, listen. And of course, we're not going to get everybody, right? So let's say even if you got 5 million Black votes, just 5,
right,
just 10%. I got 10%. I control 10% of the Black vote. And I'm just speaking metaphorically of me, right?
Right.
So Dr. Umar Ifatunde, through the Bishop Turner National Independent Black Political Union, I control 10% of the Black vote in this country. I want to know what the Democratic Party is willing to give me in exchange for this.
right,
I want to know what the Republican Party is willing to give me in exchange.
right.
And then people say, well, how you know you're going to get what you want? You know why? You have organized Black voters in a way they've never been organized to benefit themselves. We've been organized like that to benefit them.
Right.
We've never been organized like that to benefit ourselves. Because if you are the Democratic presidential nominee and I give you my 5 million votes, you know in 4 years, I'm going to have more than 5 million.
Right.
I might be up to 10. You understand? If you fail me, the Republicans automatically get the vote next year. You're automatically done. You see that?
Right.
So we have to leverage our numbers. But guess what? As you said, we are so hypnotized by the Congressional Black Caucus and the gatekeeping Negroes that the Democrat and Republican Party uses in order to control and patrol Black people that the average Negro isn't thinking about separating themselves from the Democratic or the Republican Party plantation. We love being slaves. We actually do, which is why I make the argument that there were no slaves in America prior to 1865. Slavery truly began after 1865.
Yeah.
You had captives before 1865. You had slaves after.
Yeah.
Harriet Tubman wasn't no slave.
Right.
Frederick Douglass wasn't no slave. Nat Turner wasn't no slave. Gabriel Prosser wasn't no, you understand me? Let's go to Jamaica. To Saint La Overture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Cujo of the Maroons, Akompong of the Maroons, Nanny of the Maroons, Tula in Aruba. Let's go to Guadeloupe. You got Mama Solitude. This is a Black woman, pregnant, fighting against Napoleon's army when he sought to re-enslave Africans in the French islands.
Right.
She's pregnant, fighting, and guess what she does? She joins up with another revolutionary leader. I believe that was General Inyas. And you know what they did?
Yes,
they set fire to the military battery, blew themselves up and everything with them to stop the French from getting to their people. She survives. They let her live long enough to give birth to a child, and they execute her after she gave birth. She wasn't no slave. You understand? We were captives of war until 1865.
Right.
We became slaves after the 13th Amendment.
So it all goes back. Like, that's why Black children, I feel like Black children have to know this at the most impressionable age.
But they can't. It cannot be cerebral and intellectual though.
Okay.
It has to be revolutionary and spiritual. Let me give you an example. 2 people can teach Marcus Garvey.
Right.
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 3, you got a white person teaching Garvey in public school. You got a Black person teaching Garvey in the independent Black school, but they ain't got the passion. They're teaching it objectively.
Right.
They don't teach it like they live it. They love it. They believe. You understand?
Right.
Let me come and give them 30 minutes on Garvey. They're going to walk out wanting to be Garveyites. You see the difference?
Yeah.
So when people say Black people need to be taught their history, it's not enough to teach it. They have to be convicted into their history, baptized back into blackness. When I teach our children, I'm not teaching them, I'm baptizing them back into the blackness. So it needs to be a certain kind of a teacher. Because let us be honest, many of our grandmaster teachers, as great and knowledgeable as they were, I'll give you two, and they're heroes of mine for their scholarship. Sheikh Anta Diop, probably the greatest anthropologist, cultural historian, and archaeologist ever, not just black, period.
Right.
His protege, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, probably the second greatest. And of course, I'm gonna put Dr. Ben in there as well, right? Dr. Diop and Dr. Van Sertima, master teachers of African history.
Right.
Both had white wives. Do you see?
Yeah.
It's not enough to know it.
Yeah.
They wasn't convicted as much as they did for us.
Right.
We hold them up, but you couldn't have been convicted because there's no way you bunny hop if you are.
Conviction versus teaching.
Absolutely.
Nah, that's hard. So look, it took me somewhere. I want to get back. When it comes to voting, black people entrust so much safety and security into the ballot box and just the act of participation. And we'll oftentimes convince ourselves, our ancestors died for this and this. And that's, some of that's true, but we put our safety and security in the ballot box versus forming a black economic base. And so I wanted to know from you is, if you would, explain how black political participation without a black economy hurts black America.
Because America is about money. This whole country is about capitalism, not democracy, because capitalists control the vote, you see? So if you're not financing the campaign, if you're not financing the party, if you're not financing the candidate, you really have no true say-so. You see, black power without the black dollar is simply a dream.
Right.
You gotta have an organized black dollar to build black power. And with us, we have not yet embraced the essential necessity of using our money to finance our liberty. Black people want it easy. And one of the reasons we want it easy is we really don't have a revolutionary heritage post-1970. The Black Panther Party was the last. They were the seal of the revolutionary heritage on black people. Since the demise of the Panthers, which we can probably point to about 1974, 5 years before crack. And one of the reasons America brought the crack in was to neutralize any threat of another potential black uprising. You see that? So we have not had any serious black political agenda or movement since the crack epidemic. So guess what? A black child growing up today, they don't even have a grandparent who know who Dr. King is. Imagine his grandmother don't even know who Marcus Garvey is. His grandfather don't even know who Harriet Tubman is. I'm gonna give you a true story. Intelligence testing, right? I'm a school psychologist, we do testing. There's questions on the adult intelligence test, which begins at age 16 or 17. Once you're 16 or 17, you can't take the school base. You gotta take the adult. There's questions on one of the subtests that ask about certain African heroes, right? Our children routinely get them wrong. I'm sitting there with my mouth wide open. How the hell you don't know him? You're 17 and don't know him? Oh, it's true, brother. You know why? Because my grandmother, who was born in the 70s, she had no knowledge of that. And her mother, who lived through it, wasn't brought up in a family that valued that. So you're looking at 2, 3, 4, possibly, generations of black people with no connection to a freedom struggle at all. And then on top of that, pour 50,000 gallon pounds of intoxicating black religious propaganda that tells you you don't even need to be concerned about nothing black. Just worry about Muhammad ibn Abdullah and Jesus bin Joseph or Moses. You see that? So the religion helps white supremacy because it deifies the cultural ignorance that black people have.
And that kind of plays into, I see how that feeds into black intelligentsia, because I have a nonprofit, and I was looking, and I'm still in the process of trying to start an African Center scholarship fund for it. But in my research, I noticed at one of our highest levels of education, black schools, black colleges, HBCUs, many of them don't have like an African studies program or a black studies program.
And some of them don't even offer or require. I'm gonna say require because it should be required.
Right.
Many of them don't even require an introductory level to African studies or Black history. I know this because I speak at them a lot.
Right.
And when I ask the students, I be shocked. They say, Dr. Umar, we're not even required. It may be offered,
Right.
but we're not required. And some colleges it's not even offered.
Right.
And to go a step further, because you have the colonization or the gentrification of the HBCU by the white professor, a lot of these African-centered courses are being taught by white people, not Black, even at a HBCU.
Exactly. And I'm a graduate of Tennessee State. Now we have an African Studies program. It used to be offered as a major, and now it's down to a minor. But like you said, it wasn't required, and I accidentally stumbled into the course, which kind of, going back to your word, it convicted me into Black history because I had a good professor. I had several good professors. So shout out to them at TSU. But I wanted to know, how can we better utilize HBCUs to become incubators to produce African-centered scholars who soon to be professionals in the world? And with the affirmative action thing going on now, should HBCUs recruit throughout the entire diaspora?
I think they should. We know for a fact that Booker T. Washington, with the Tuskegee machine, he actually used to have the Tuskegee Conference on Africa, where he brought Africans to Tuskegee and taught them the useful skills they needed to try to build independent institutions. And this is before the arrival of Marcus Garvey. In fact, this is even before Mr. Garvey finds the UNIA. In fact, I argue that one of the reasons Garvey came to America was not just to meet Booker T because he wanted to build a Tuskegee in Jamaica, but to meet with Booker T because Booker T was already about the work of African liberation. Remember, Booker T. Washington was invited by Henry Sylvester Williams to present at the first Pan-African Congress in 1900. He wasn't able to make it, but he still helped to fund it, and he still helped to propagate it. So I think Booker T, the Pan-Africanist, has largely been skipped over, you see, and probably because W.E.B. Du Bois, who also technically was a Pan-Africanist, practically he wasn't, you see, but because of his hatred towards Booker T and, of course, Garvey, he wanted to be the quintessential Pan-Africanist. And I think he saw Garvey and Booker T as both rivals to that throne, which he technically did not earn until both of them passed on. You understand? But 3 questions when you deal with the HBCU. Number one, you got your land grant colleges from the state, then you got your privates. The privates are the ones we should focus on because they're independent and they're struggling. So if we're going to finance them, I think they're willing to listen. We need to zero in on the privates. The land grant state colleges, they state run. There's only so much say-so you want to have over them anyway. But then the other question that has to be had is who is responsible for bringing these leaders in, because just like when you deal with African leadership or African-American leadership, we got to look closely at HBCU leadership. And a lot of these presidents, I've met many, but not all, a lot of these presidents, they're not progressive at all. They're gatekeepers. They're Black bourgeoisies who are only there to manage the miseducation, not to take that particular institution into the future. But the third question I got to be asked, is it not time for some modern HBCUs? Historical is fine, but we need modern HBCUs. You follow what I'm saying? We need a modern college right now that's going to prepare Black children on how to deal with the problems we got. How are we going to deal with gentrification? How are we going to deal with food? You see, you got Bill Gates buying up all the arable farmland so he could turn it into toxic food to kill Black folks. How are we going to combat that? Raising a modern military. How should we invest in Africa? We have about 20 major issues. And guess what? They're not being addressed by the HBCUs. We need modern HBCU. Just like America takes old factory buildings and old prisons and old schools and turn them into modern institutions, we need to be buying some of these old factories, old prisons, old schools, and turning them into new age HBCUs.
Well, in the spirit of your pursuit, what you've done with FDMG, hopefully we're going to breed those who will create and build those modern HBCUs. Because I think, we take that for granted when it comes to the possibilities that we can do by institution. And you talked a lot about that late last year when, when it came to Deion Sanders leave and everything like that. We've dropped the ball with that a lot, so I appreciate that. I want to move to Africa really quick. Right now, the coup took place in Niger. And, we see the different positions of some of the African countries. I want to know, how do you feel about the countries that are supporting Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali, and how should Black America respond to what's going on in Niger?
I think Black America should respond to the 4 coups. Although Niger, you know, is getting the most attention because it's the latest and it has such a large uranium deposit, which is necessary for the white man's atomic weapons, is getting most of the attention. Mali is also an extremely large country geographically, right? Then you have Burkina Faso and you have Guinea. Of course, I'm somewhat disappointed in Guinea's president because he's married to a snow bunny. You know, I have an issue with a black leader who would bring a white woman before black people. You know, so that's something that we're going to have to agree to disagree on if I ever get a chance to meet the brother. But I think right now our position should be investigatory because we don't know whose agenda they're serving. I do believe President Ibrahim Traoré, the president of Burkina Faso, I think he's legit. You understand me? Right now, I'm behind him. Right now. Of course, that can change based on decisions he makes, but I believe he's the real deal. I'm being told the president of Mali is the real deal. Some people are telling me they're not too clear on the president of Guinea. And when it comes to Niger, I'm being told that he might be the real deal. So Guinea and Niger, I'm still studying. Burkina Faso, I'm behind him right now. Mali, I have no reason to doubt him, but I still need to learn more. Because let's be honest, how do we know this isn't the CIA? Because let's be honest, every one of those countries except one has an African base. And it has not been clarified by the new leaders what is your plans for the African base. You see, many of them were trained by African. So how do we know America is not behind this to simply get y'all to drive the French out? So now y'all could do business with Washington, D.C. You follow what I'm saying? So I need clarity on the African bases that are in these countries, because until y'all tell me where you stand on that African, how do I know this was an American finance coup? You see what I'm saying? So for me, it's still more questions than answers. But if it is legitimate, it's a breath of fresh air that we need. But here's the thing. Whenever someone steps up claiming to have a solution, claiming to be real, it's a gift and a curse. If they real, it's a gift. Let's push forward. Let's start a new United States of Africa. Let's get your own currency. Put some of that land to the side of Niger and Mali for Africans in the diaspora to come back home because y'all got a lot of it. You follow me? But if this ends up being a scam, if this ends up being a CIA front, that punch-drunk conversation we just had, it just got that much more worse. Because remember now, you can only take but so much disappointment. I believed in this leader. He did nothing. I believed in this leader. He did nothing. I believed in this leader. He did nothing. This is one of the reasons why I took the FDMG Academy campaign so personally, because I know that there were black people who are willing to put their faith in me who had already been disappointed by so many other people. You see? So with the ups and downs of the campaign, I'm like, there's people who genuinely believe in me, but I don't know how much longer they're going to hang around with the anti-Ifatunde propaganda that's all over YouTube. Even though I'm extremely popular amongst our people, the haters are a very committed, convicted group of people. They are. And one of the things that this whole campaign has taught me is how gullible even well-meaning black people can be. How gullible.
Even the intelligent ones.
Yes, gullible. You know, people say, yeah, I heard you're not building a school. How you know I'm not building a school? Because somebody said it on YouTube. You see that?
Funny.
So just because somebody said it, it automatically has to be true. Our people can be very, very gullible.
I was telling it's funny, my cousin, I was telling him I was interviewing you. He was like, man, you know, I don't know about Dr. Umar. I said, what you mean? He said, man, you know, he ain't do that school. I said, who told you he didn't do the school? I said, your cousin been to the school.
You still have people saying, where the school at? You know why? Because what I had to learn, and this is why I stopped entertaining the hate. In the beginning, when they started hating back in 14 and 15, when we started the fundraiser, I was on it. Because I'm trying to clear my name and let people know we real. But when I came to the conclusion that this was more about sabotage and character assassination, I left it alone. And one of the things that helped me come to that conclusion was when they was going around saying I didn't have my doctorate degree.
That's crazy.
So what happened was I got a phone call from the registrar's office at the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine. That's where I earned my doctorate in clinical psychology. And a white woman said, we're getting phone calls about your credentials from your people, hundreds a week. They were literally harassing that college for no reason other than to try to slander my name. So she said, with your permission, we would like to tell them that you did earn your degree. If you allow us to do that, we can cut down on the calls. I said, go ahead. Up until then, I didn't give a damn what they thought because I didn't have a need to prove nothing to nobody.
Right.
Because people was like, why don't he put a picture of the degree online?
Right.
Ninja, who are you for me to be proving anything to?
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
First of all, I got more credentials than anybody else in the conscious community. There's people in the conscious community who call themselves doctor, who I know for a fact have no doctorate. You understand? Elders and youth, they've never been questioned. But you want to question a man who actually got the paperwork. But my point is, even after they could call the school and find out for sure that I had a doctorate, they continued to say I didn't have one. Same thing with my kinship to Frederick Douglass. They said I wasn't related to Frederick Douglass. You understand? I said, well, here's the family tree. Here's the family book. Why am I in it? Because I didn't put myself in it. You understand?
Yeah.
Even after the proof, they still continue with the slander. So once you realize this ain't about no truth, this is about hate, you leave it alone.
Yeah, we sick, man.
We are.
Like,
we are. But success changes behavior. And you've often heard me say institutions change behavior.
Right.
And now that we finally have an institution, I'll be able to control behavior to some extent because if you want to participate in anything we got going on at the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy, not just the school, but the community initiatives, you're going to have to think a certain way, you're going to have to act a certain way, and you're going to have to behave a certain way. We're calling FDMG heaven on earth on purpose because that would be one place black people can come and be comfortable being black and don't have to worry about being mistreated by nobody else, you see. And I know that I'm going to have to make some examples out of some people. I know there's going to be people, you understand me, who are haters who are going to come in there and say the wrong thing. You banned for life, bro. I know there's people from other ideological camps who are jealous of the school. They're going to come and try to recruit and push their agenda. Bruh, this is the house of Garvey. You don't do that here. I would never come into your place and push Garvey. You understand? Don't come here and do it. So I know I'm going to have to make some exampple out of people because in order for FDMG to be heaven on earth, I'm going to have to expel a couple demons.
Yeah. And that's you had to do. I want to ask a question. So earlier this year, I saw that you went to South Africa and you met with the brother Julius Malema of the EFF. Were you all able to explore, maybe come up with any type of plan to connect South Africans and American Africans?
It was a brief meeting, not very private.
I got you.
There was others around, but they were members of my team or his. It was short-lived. I really didn't get the energy from him that he was looking to really collaborate. And I don't say that facetiously. You know, I just don't think that was the time because, you know, they got a big election coming up and I'm assuming he's running for president. So I think that was probably more on his mind than Pan-African liberation. With that being said, I support the brother. You know, I do think he cares about his people. I think he's going to have to address the contradiction, though, of being a supporter of the rainbow agenda, which he is. We definitely disagree on that, you understand? And I'm just hoping that he's not being financed, you know, by any entities that could be disadvantageous to the best interests of the South African people because no revolutionary Pan-Africanist should be supporting homosexuality. You know, so other than that contradiction, I don't have anything else that gives me pause. I wish him well. If he does become president of South Africa, and I think he will one day, you know, I hope he corrects that, number one. But I also hope he is what our South African people need because they've been through a lot since 1994, since being promised the fall of apartheid, which never really fell. You understand? They've had leaders come and go who really haven't delivered what they needed to deliver. The ANC, to some extent, I think, has fallen victim to the corruption that can come from any political party that's been entrenched in power for too long. You know, whether Brother Malema's party will be that party that the South African people need, that remains to be seen. But we all know it's easier to talk it than to walk it. It's easier to say it before you get into office than after. But like I said, I have faith in the brother. I think he'll do the right thing. And I just hope that he doesn't disappoint the people when he's given an opportunity to lead.
Right. And so with that, because I was going to ask you about that, him endorsing the LGBT movement, what should African people throughout the diaspora, what should we make of that? Like, it seems like to get ahead, especially for a lot of these African nations, you have to do that. And if you don't get with the LGBT, the rainbow agenda, America punishes you. So like, how are we supposed to maneuver and what should we make of that?
Well, it's true. They cut your money if you don't support it. With that being said, we have to have African leaders and Caribbean leaders and Central and South American leaders that we support enough who are revolutionary enough where they don't feel the need to depend on a white man's money. And that's one of the things I'm really appreciating from Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso and even to some extent from Guinea, it appears like they're trying to cut that political and economic umbilical cord to French, Germany, the UK, and the United States. But at the same time, I would caution them, don't switch out one white supremacist slave master for another. Okay, Russia is not your friend.
Right.
Russia also wants to be the imperialist controller of Africa. You see, China wants to be the imperialist controller of Africa. So my enemy's enemy is my friend has not really historically bode well for African nations. So my thing is, don't dismiss the French and then go buddying up too closely to the Russian. Because one day you might have to fight the Russians. You understand? So we got to recognize we don't have no friends at the end of the day. As the late great Pan-Africanist ancestor scholar warrior Dr. John Henry Clark said, Africa has always had things that people wanted and didn't want to pay for. Russia and China are no different.
Yeah, that's right. I was watching your live, I think 2 days ago, and I think you were doing your Black Parent call, and a sister called in and she was talking about how a 6-year-old had a trans person as a teacher, and it didn't seem like she was too comfortable with that, which I can understand. And you were giving her different options to go as far as combat it, but you said something that was important. You said you can only get so much support because it's a civil right of theirs now.
Yeah.
So with that being said, with that given rather, is there any way to halt the influx of people of that group into Black schools?
No, you can't. Because unfortunately, Black America saw Barack Hussein Obama as some sort of a savior and a saint. And Barack Obama brought with him into office the LGBTQ agenda. But not only that, he brought with him the childhood transgender agenda. It was Barack Obama who made the girls' bathroom safe for boys and the boys' bathroom safe for girls. And so Black people have to look to Barack Obama as the one who initiated this movement right here. You know, and so as far as these transformers being teachers in the classroom, I'm against it. But since it's been elevated to civil rights, there's nothing we can do about it. And to clarify, it was elevated to almost to civil right by the 1964 Civil Rights Act, because the Republicans refused to sign it if Black people were going to be the only protected category. Remember, going back to what I said earlier, nothing can be done just for us. It has to have other people in there so they can deflect the resources. So they said that gender and sexuality had to be added into the 1964 Civil Rights Bill as additional protected categories, you see. So it was already just about there. But it was still not accepted in the Black community, and even in the larger white society, it wasn't something that was at the forefront of people's minds. That would all change with Barack Obama. So he made sure he solidified it as a civil right to be that way and to be able to infiltrate and colonize any institution, including the public classroom. So unfortunately, as long as it is a civil right, I don't think there's going to be anything we can do about it. You could look to potentially the conservative Supreme Court reversing it, but it don't even look like they're going to touch it. And the reason why I don't think they're going to touch it is because this whole LGBT, transgender, sexual reassignment surgery agenda, it's all part of the global African depopulation agenda. That's why everybody's turning a blind eye to it. White people are trying to wipe as many Black people as they can off the face of the earth. And this is a very effective means. Why? Because if I can convince the boy to castrate himself, because that's all sexual assignment surgery is. It's castration. Once they remove your testicles, you don't get them back. Same thing with the woman. Once they remove your ovaries and give you an artificial penis, you don't get your ovaries back. This is castration, self-inflicted genocide disguised as transgender freedom. And we are falling all into it. And because Black people don't own nothing, don't control nothing, and don't want to build nothing that we can call our own, we're merciless in the face of this thing.
So as a parent, because one thing I take seriously is the youth. As a parent, how can we prepare our children and equip them to not be influenced by the forces that are out there? Because they got their propaganda everywhere. TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Snap, it's all over. And then if it's not there, it's so much imagery outside that indirectly influences you. What can parents do who want the betterment for their children? What can parents do to make sure that our children are not influenced to that magnitude to where they consider that?
They got to educate them and they got to be unapologetic about it. If you're unapologetic about your racial identity, people are going to have your kids confused. And if you're unapologetic in teaching your children about their sexual identity, people are going to have your children confused. So we have to be strong with it. We got to be direct. We got to be forceful. And we can't play games. And I'm coming across parents who are very weak in both respects. I'm coming across black parents who have an issue telling their sons not to date outside the race. How are you as a black woman not comfortable telling your son not to date out the race? That's insane to me. But look at that weakness, that church. That's that conditioning. You see, we're colorblind. We're all God's children. That nonsense. And then on the gender side, I'm having parents say, well, you know, Dr. Umar, I don't want my son hating homosexuals. I didn't tell you to tell him to hate nobody. I don't hate homosexuals, but I disagree with the lifestyle. If you are this soft and undecided in teaching your son about his manhood, he's going to get out there, he's going to come across some strong homosexuals in middle school, and they're going to get him. And it's going to be your fault because you was too soft. You know what our problem is? We're afraid of backlash from the power structure. We're afraid of backlash from the power structure. One of the greatest enemies of black progress is a Negro with a good job and a good retirement package, because he ain't willing to risk anything, you understand, for his safety and comfort. Government employees are the new house Negroes, and middle-class blacks are. Because once you get $60,000, $70,000 a year, good dental, good medical, good retirement, them Negroes will move hell and heaven to protect the white power structure that's guaranteeing their retirement.
That's a fact. And, you know, I just think about, like, when I was in high school about 16 years ago, this wouldn't even been a conversation, wouldn't even been a thought. You know what I'm saying? And as a heterosexual man and being around other heterosexual men, I don't recall anybody hating anybody that was, you know, their lifestyle, but it wasn't a thought, you know, to even consider it that way. So that was some good information. I want to ask you this, moving on to like relationships. That seems to be a hot topic in the black community today, relationships between black men and black women. And what I noticed is when it comes to black male and female relationships, a lot of us make a lot of life-changing decisions earlier on in life, usually like in our teenage, mid-teenage years, early adult years. And oftentimes we'll become scarred because infidelity might have taken place. And mind you, I'm talking about when we're young, you know, your boyfriend, girlfriend cheat on you, and that does something to your outlook. Or, you know, you might have just flat out been left. You know, people move on, especially at that age. What are your thoughts on black youth being formally educated on how to relate to the opposite sex?
I think they should. At the FDMG Academy, one thing we're going to have is manhood and gentleman training. We're going to teach them that sort of thing. I think girls need it too, because I think with the masculinization of black women, our girls are more manly than they've ever been, more aggressive, less ladylike, and having less respect for men. You know, so I think the whole the misogyny against women and the masculinity that women now have dictates that both the boys and the girls are equally prepared for how to interact with the opposite sex.
That's good. I always think about that. You know, I look at how we operate now, and I always think about the precursor to it. Something probably took place when they were younger that makes them look at men this way, or makes them look at women.
I think a lot of it is direct instruction from abused, traumatized women in their life.
Wow.
You know, if you're a young girl, you 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, your mother was beat by your dad, or your aunt was choked out by the boyfriend, or grandma was abandoned by granddad for a white girl. You understand those lessons that girl is going to get are going to all but persuade her away from dating a black male, you know, so that trauma was vicariously passed down. She didn't experience it, but she's re-experiencing it through the lessons that she's given from, you know, her elders.
And playing off of the lessons, you see a lot of us, but I really want to focus on the young girls. You see a lot of them make choices and decisions early because, you know, a lot of us growing up in these single parent households, especially with the girls, a lot of them don't really know a man until it's time to know a man. And then when that happens, they become scarred, hurt. So let me ask you this, as a father, psychologist, brother, what advice do you give to young girls as far as picking a mate?
Well, number one, I think when they're young, the focus should be on making sure they're becoming the woman they need to be first. I think because of the absenteeism of men in our homes, our girls are introduced too soon into dating and mating,
Right.
not for sexuality, but for psychology, the need for that validation, because it is the mother that teaches a girl how to be a woman, but it's the father who validates her womanhood,
Right.
you see. And since a lot of our girls never had their womanhood validated by their dad, they're still looking for that. And that's what leads to the teenage pregnancy. So we have to make sure that they understand what it is to be a woman and how to be a woman. But I think part of that, to your point, is we got to we got to have therapy. There has to be a meaningful and effective, easy to access mental health treatment modality in the Black community. We don't have that.
Right.
Yes, we have the Association of Black Psychologists. Yes, we got thousands of Black psychologists around the country. But where is the meaningful community-based systemic treatment program? We don't have it. And to that point, I think that, again, going back to the Black middle class gatekeeping elite, many of our Black professionals are members of that gatekeeping elite. And as a part of that, they're more concerned about capitalism and their own best interests than what's in the best interest of Black people.
Right.
That's why the Black psychologists are not really doing the work in the streets. Don't get me wrong. They got the theories, they got the programs, they got it all, but it ain't being implemented. You see,
Right.
That's why the Black doctors haven't given us no hospitals. That's why the Black lawyers aren't fighting some of the biggest issues that we got. Where's the class action lawsuit against special ed? Where's the class action lawsuit against mass incarceration? Where's the class action lawsuit against gentrification? Where's the class action lawsuit against forcing the transformer movement on our kids?
Right.
There's so many legal battles we should be fighting. Who fighting? You see that? So W.E.B. Du Bois said that the talented 10th should lead us. Well, guess what? If he believed that, he's turning over in his grave from Ghana right now, because the talented 10th has all but sold out and turned their back on Black folks. We are living at a time where everybody wants to be middle class, but nobody wants to serve the underclass.
So I look at it, I'm always thinking about the youth. And this kind of piggybacks back onto our Garveyism earlier, our Garveyism conversation. Most Black youth, especially our boys, see that the pathway to success is by being an entertainer, athlete, or turning to the streets. It kind of culminated all, given that type of mindset that they possess. How do we make Black independence realistic and normal to our Black children, especially our Black boys?
Seeing is believable. And without the example, there will be no replication. You see, the reason why they want to be athletes and entertainers, that's all they see. All the Black professional men have abandoned the inner city for a life in a white suburb. You understand? Some of them have moved to a Black suburb. But guess what? The children who are the most vulnerable, those are the impoverished Black boys. Those middle class people are not coming back to save them, although they may come back to hustle them if they can get some grant money for it. You understand? But true service that's given from the heart, you don't see a lot of that going from Black boys to Black men. Excuse me, from Black men to Black boys, or from Black women to Black girls. We have lost the spirit of service and charity in the Black community. We've lost it. When you go back in our history, we come from a tradition of self-help societies.
Right.
We have Black self-help societies all over the country, all over the world. That's how we got buried. That's how the babies were born. That's where the life insurance came from. That's where the community defense came from. Service organizations. We don't have service organizations. You got intellectual masturbation camps and religious cliques disguised as service organizations, but they take more than they give.
I got you. So let me ask you this. When it comes to Black relationships again, you'll see a lot of couples. Right now it's a thing, you see a lot of couples championing couples therapy and things like that. But I've noticed it's a lot of people who put the relationship before themselves. Like they've let the relationship define who they are. Do you feel like individual therapy should come before couples therapy? Do you feel
yes,
like
yes, because a lot of what we call relationship problems are really individual pathologies and traumas that are spilling over into the relationship. If I was an unhappy person before I started the relationship with that sister, this is not a relationship problem. It's me. You understand? If she was an alcoholic before we dated, or a weed head, or she had low self-esteem or parental abandonment issues before we met, that's a her problem, not a we. So treating the system when the problem is really with a component of the system is a waste of time. You know, I'm a firm proponent that if y'all got issues communicating with each other, you can still have your couples therapy, but both of y'all still need to have individual therapy as well to deal with them issues that's feeding into the relationship. You know, the irony of romance is that the people who seek it the most are the ones who are least ready for it. And also the people who need the most help are the first ones looking for a relationship, because it becomes a distraction from working on the self. A relationship for an unhealthy person is a distraction from focusing on self. And that's why a lot of people have to end relationships when they're dealing with people who are less than their best, because you often find that the person you're dating who is less than their best don't want to become the best version of themselves. You understand me? Me being in this relationship with you is for you to co-sign this. This is supposed to be a codependency. I wasn't looking for growth. I wasn't looking for you to make the best version of who I am. I was simply wanting you to validate this. You understand? So oftentimes when you're in a relationship with a dysfunctional person, you have to leave it because you realize they just wanted a codependency. They wanted you to co-sign the alcoholism. Give them excuses for continuance. You understand? Give them excuses for continuing. If you somebody about becoming your best person, you better make sure the person you settle them down with is also interested in being the best versions of themselves, because somebody trying to be God and somebody content with being the devil cannot coexist in the same space and time.
That's a fact. And I've said that quite often and felt that quite often. So to hear you say that is definitely gratifying. Second to last question. Dr. John Henry Clark said one time, he was talking in passing, and he was saying, you know, oftentimes our people will say, you know, we need another Malcolm. We need another Garvey. And his response is, what did you do with the first one? You know, what would you need one now if you didn't do right by the first one? I look at you, Dr. Umar, and I look at the strides you made and just the vision and purpose that you have for our people. You hadn't seen that in a long time. How do we protect you, Dr. Umar?
I mean, I have my security, you know, wherever I go, I have security there. Outside of that, I like to travel solo often, you know, because once you are seen with security every second of your life, you look vulnerable when you don't have it. I never want to lose that safety of being able to walk through the streets alone and people not feel like I'm at risk for danger because they used to see me with 10, 20 people all the time. You follow me? So I never want to lose that ability to just be a regular brother, you see. And also we got to keep in mind that most of our great men who were assassinated, they were assassinated either by or with the help of the members of the inner circle of their security team. You understand? So you also got to be careful of that, you know, from Malcolm to Jesse, especially when you go to Africa, you know, from Lumumba, Amilcar Cabral, Walter Rodney. There were people they knew who participated in those. Fred Hampton, whose chief of security drugged his Kool-Aid. He slept through his own assassination, you know, and we are less loyal now than we were then. You understand? So if they do that to them, imagine what they'd do to me. You know, so you have to be careful, man, because this struggle is a lonely struggle. Garvey spoke to that. Most of our leaders spoke to that. So I've benefited from it. From all those lessons, I experienced a lot of what they had to say. And it's a very lonely struggle, even when you got a lot of people around you, because the people around you, a lot of times their agenda is not your best interest, nor is it the agenda you're living and dying for. You know, they always have something personal they're trying to push, a relationship, or they want to build their social media. They want to get their business off the ground through you. You understand? Which is fine if it comes as a consequence of you being focused on the goal. But a lot of time, they're not even focused on the goal. They're just focused on getting their agendas met. So even when you're surrounded by people, you can still be lonely, because you look around and you say, how many people are really here for why I'm here, you see? And if I died today or tomorrow, how many of these people would pick up this torch and keep on pushing? So it's a very, very lonely struggle. I always say, you know, two things. One, if I had a half dozen, I don't even need 12 like Christ, give me 6. If I had a half dozen men and women that I could absolutely trust with anything, I would have gotten so much more done than now. You can only give people but so much, because you can't entrust them with too much, because if they flip on you, now they have the information. You understand? So it's a very neurotic existence. You know, the Honorable Marcus Garvey said, when I meet somebody who's good, I got to try to get as much out of them as I can before they flip on me. And it's a shame. You know, I met an attorney one time that says whenever she does contracts for black musicians, rap groups, singing groups, bands, she always does a separation clause, even if they don't ask for it. She says, if we don't do a separation clause, I can't represent you.
Right.
I said, why? She said, because unfortunately with black people, it's not a question of if they're going to break up. It's when.
Right.
This is what she said.
Yeah,
She said, I will not represent a group of blacks, business or entertainment, if we don't have a separation clause. Because no matter how good friends they are, ego or money is going to split them, you see? And so when I'm working with people, I got to keep in my mind that one day he may be my worst enemy. So I can't give him the whole plan. I can't give him everything. And it's a shame because sometimes you want to lay your load on somebody else's shoulder to ease your burden. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, you see? But unfortunately, you can't do that. But you are sustained in this work, as I think the ancestors were, by the fact that you know that you were born to do it. That's my sustaining premise. You understand?
Right.
When things are tough, when I'm depressed, when I'm struggling, the FDMG renovations, I can't believe I survived that. Because that was a hell of an emotional and psychological roller coaster to be on when you think we about to finish the renovations and the guy ran off with the money and he ain't coming back. You see what I'm saying? So I can't believe I survived that. But what got me through it was knowing my purpose. And even as a therapist, one of the things I tell most of the clients is we got to find out what your purpose is. Because if you have a reason for being, and if you have a reason for living, and if you have a reason for putting up with that hell, if your life has meaning, if you know the whys of what you're doing, you can put up with almost any detraction. And that's what carried me through. Is I literally believe I was born to do the work that I'm doing.
That's powerful. And, you know, I appreciate that last part because, again, we have to put that type of information or put that type of motivation into our children, getting them to believe the why. Dr. Umar, it's been a pleasure.
Yes, sir.
If you would, for those who don't know, if you would let people know how to, you still taking donations?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
We got to fund the operations.
Yeah.
Brothers and sisters, please support the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy. Hit your Cash App, $FDMG School. That's cash.me/$FDMG School. Hit your PayPal for my international Africans in particular, paypal.me/FDMG Academy. So again, it's FDMG School on the Cash App, FDMG Academy on the PayPal. And if you want to mail in your donation, P.O. Box 9634, Wilmington, Delaware. P.O. Box 9634, Wilmington, Delaware, 19809. You can also go to drumarjohnson.com, DRUMARJOHNSON.com, and you can click directly on the links to make your donation. You can also click directly on my social media. Unfortunately, these Negroes and ninjas have created so many fraudulent Cash Apps, so many fraudulent PayPals, so many fraudulent Instagrams, so many fraudulent Facebooks and Twitters that it's best to go to my website and click the correct link from there. Peace and Pan-Africanism.
It's been the debut episode of Black Top 5. Follow us on Instagram at Black Top 5. To anybody wanting to purchase a copy of Teach Me About Garvey or Teach Me About Malcolm or Red, Black, and Green, tell me what it means for your children. Go to mrbookshelf.com. M like mama, R like Ruby, bookshelf.com. Catch you next time.